Here's the latest version of Webflow Interactions powered by GSAP, and wow, has Webflow outdone themselves this time. So the latest version is already rolling out to users and will be available to everyone by the end of the month. Under versions here at the bottom, we can switch over to interactions with GSAP. In the past, I used to avoid classic interactions because I didn't want two interaction libraries on one site. But what I love about this is we can now create as many interactions as possible natively with GSAP to make it friendly for no coders and add our own custom GSAP interactions on top without needing a whole separate library. Now, we can also make these interactions more reusable. We can target by custom selectors or even data attributes now. So for instance, this entire content block, I've given an attribute of data reveal content with a value of component, and then the heading inside gets data reveal content values heading, paragraph, data reveal content, value paragraph. And for the button group, it's data reveal content, the value is button group, but I'm actually going to target the children inside. So no matter which button the client adds in, it will stagger all of the children regardless of what their class is on those children. And I'm just reusing that same kind of structure here. So this is my data reveal content component. Then I have the heading and the button group inside, but I'm not actually using the paragraph in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and select over this component. We'll head over to interactions. There's a couple different trigger types we have, and I'm sure Webflow will be adding more, but we'll start with this custom event because I wanted to call this out specifically. So we can use some default pre-built interactions Webflow has, or we can build our own. But what's great about this custom trigger here is we can actually trigger it with custom code. So if we want to run it with some logic only after a video is loaded or the first time the user visits the site or on form submit, we can trigger native interactions with custom code, which just gives a lot of control. So here I'm going to start with a scroll interaction since that's probably the most common, and we'll use a custom animation. So it's starting us right in with the element we want to animate, but I'll back out of that for just a second, and we'll start with our trigger for this interaction. So in this case, it's targeting by class, but we can use a custom selector if we want to say this class and find the direct link inside of this. We can do any CSS things there, or we can actually use data attribute. And in this case, I'm going to say data, we'll say reveal content. And we'll go ahead and say with the value of component, because right now it's selecting all of them. So only the component one. And that way we just have that element there. And then I want to have this start whenever the top of this element is at the bottom of the screen, which is what we have here. And we can toggle those markers on and off if we'd like. We can use top, center, bottom, or percentages. So maybe when the top of this element is 80%, from the top of the screen. We can set that there. So the most common lockup I like to use for most of my scroll interactions is top bottom for the start. And then for the end, I say when the top of the element is something like 70% from the top of the screen, or whichever percentage you'd like there. And right now, between those 2 points, it's scrubbing the animation. So this is similar to while scroll from the previous version of interactions we had before. But if we want this to just play at a set duration when we hit a certain point, we'd use trigger actions. So here, when the top of element crosses past the bottom of the screen, we don't actually want to do anything yet because this element isn't in view enough yet for us to see the animation anyway. But when it leaves out past this 70% mark, that's when we actually want to play our animation. And then when it enters back, when we're scrolling back through that 70% mark, we don't want to do anything yet, so we'll say none. And then when it leaves back past the bottom of the screen here, that's when we want to reset our animation so the heading is hidden again. And that way when we come back in, the heading is still hidden and it waits till the heading is more in view before we start to animate that element. So this is the default lockup you'll probably want for most times scroll interactions. And it just makes sure the element's in view before we animate and that it leaves view before we clear out the animation. Now for this action here, I'm going to rename this to my heading action, and I can open up the timeline here to see it here. I'll go ahead and open this, and right now we're just selecting the same as the trigger. So when the content comes into view, we animate that content div. We'll start with the entire content being the trigger, and then selecting a separate element as a target attribute in this case. So I'll say data reveal content, and then the value is going to be heading. So this way we're animating the heading. And we'll go ahead and do just a from animation. We don't need to set the end state. We'll animate the heading from opacity 0 and from a move Y of 100%. So we're pushing that heading down by 100% of its own height, like so. And we can scrub this animation. We can play it back at a slower speed or in reverse or anything we'd like there. And here we're going to go ahead and split the text. And I love how easy this part is to do. So we can split by lines, words, or letters. And we can also mask the words if we want to wrap each word in a mask. So now you'll notice each word is kind of masked like so. And then we can go ahead and stagger them. So if we do an offset time, that's going to put, let's say, 0.5 second duration between the start of each word, which I wouldn't recommend because if you have a lot of words here, it could make the animation longer than we expect. So typically for words and letters, I like to do total time, where we're just saying let all the words start within 0.5 seconds. And then each word is going to animate over a duration of 0.25. So if we add those two together, our total duration is 0.75 seconds there for this whole animation. And we can have this right now, it's animating from the first word on down. We could have this actually stagger from the end so that it animates from that last word like so. I love how I can hit spacebar to play. We can do from random so that each time a random word animates in a random order. We can do from the edges, so it starts from the first and last and animates towards the middle, and then element at lets us start at a certain word. So I'll just do start here, but we have a lot of control here, and this eases the stagger, and then this eases each individual word. So if we want the words to slowly ramp up in speed, we could ease the whole stagger. So that is the heading animation. And then I'll go ahead and add another action here, a custom action, and I'll go ahead and say paragraph. And we'll go ahead and select, we're going to do attribute, we'll do data, reveal, content, and we'll say paragraph. And we have that set. And then here we're going to do just a from animation. We'll animate it from opacity of 0 and from a scale of 0.9. Now what we'll notice is this paragraph is scaling from the center like so, and we might want it to actually anchor from a different point. So let's remove some of these actions here, and then we can add our own properties here. And there's some new ones. We can toggle a class, which is something we couldn't do before. And I'm sure Webflow will be adding others, but in this case, we're going to do origin. And for anything that doesn't have a duration here, it'll just do it instantly. So it detects that. So we're going to make the origin be at the top corner. And that way this text scales from that top corner instead of the center like so. And so that's good for our paragraph. One thing you'll notice is I lost my heading animation here, can't actually see it. So I think that's just a bug that'll probably get fixed, but we can just close in and out of preview and it seems to work again. So then now I can open the timeline and see the whole thing in action together. So then from here, I'm going to go ahead and create another action, a custom one, and we'll also target by attribute. And here we're going to do that same data reveal content. And we're going to say this is going to be our button group. And then this is where the scope selector really helps because we can just say any children within the button group. You can also look for specific children, like pass in a specific class you're looking for. But this case, we're just going to do any children within that group. And then we're just going to animate them from an opacity of 0, from a scale of 0.8. And we're actually going to stagger them with an offset time of 0.1 and 0.1 offset time, and total duration or duration for each button is 0.3. And so that way they kind of just stagger in one after the other like that, and they're scaling. We'll make that happen halfway through the paragraph potentially. And let's go ahead and close that. So the same interaction is applying to this button group down here, which isn't a huge issue if your sections are far enough apart where you wouldn't see both of them at the same time. But otherwise, I would make each child its own separate interaction. And you can also rename your interactions here to keep them organized. So in this case, I'll just call it something like reveal content for this interaction here. And let's just preview it just to get the the best result. So we'll notice our heading is completely hidden. When the top of it reaches the 70% mark, we're animating the heading. When we scroll back down, it's going to wait to clear till we go out past the bottom of the screen. So now that's hidden again. When we scroll in, the heading and the buttons and everything staggers in. But that's an overview of the latest version of Webflow interactions. There's so much more that we can do here. There's we can actually reverse timelines, which is something we could never do before. So on hover in, we could play. On hover out, we can reverse instead of creating two separate interactions. We can choose to speed up the hover out timeline. There's a lot of good stuff that's in GSAP we have access to in here. So definitely try it out. And I'm excited to make more tutorials on this in the future.